Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, Wednesday morning, January the 19th, and I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and the chat room's open there, and the link is in there if anybody wants to check that out. I did my show yesterday, but only about a few minutes of it recorded. I actually did the whole thing and didn't realize that I had been dropped from the call until it was so over. So I'll just kind of repeat what we were going over this morning, and that is after the abuse has ended. This is another article from Catherine Patricelli from mentalhelp.net, www.mentalhelp.net. And there's a few more articles on here that I really want to cover, and then we'll move on. Like I said, it's taken me a little while to get through this, but I wanted to kind of finish here, and then before we move on. It's a good website. I hope everybody will go check it out. There's all kinds of info on there about domestic violence and abuse, about child abuse, about the effects of child abuse and whatnot, and adult survivor issues and whatnot. There's all kinds of really good info on there. I hope people will go and just take a look at what's there. And so, I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows, and you have to listen at your own discretion to all of my shows. I'm talking about abuse, and it's very sensitive. This is a sensitive subject, for most people. And you could, if you do find it uncomfortable, it's really your discretion. You have to know what's good for you to listen to, and if you think the show might trigger you, or you just feel like it might make you uncomfortable, then it's up to you to turn the show off. You have to listen at your own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone with you, like an adult or someone listen to the show with you to sort of help you make the decision whether you should be listening or not. There's all kinds of adult material on my shows, and I really believe in protecting children. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're standing up at all times to protect children. That's what we're doing, and we're trying to save children's lives, right? So you have to know how to keep yourself safe online. And anytime there's a chat room present, you really need to know how to keep yourself safe in a chat room. So if you don't know that stuff, that information, and you haven't heard a whole lot about it, just type into your browser internet safety, online safety for children, internet safety, things like that, and it will bring you to websites that will help you to learn how to keep yourself safe online. It's very, very important to me. We're working to stop child abuse and of all types. So that includes my show. Be very careful what you're listening to, what you're doing online. And this show, is mainly about stopping child abuse and standing up for child rights and speaking out against child abuse. But there is a lot of adult content on my shows, and so anyone under the age of 18, I would ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, and that would be very great. Thanks very much. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate everybody who's listening and, who's following me along here on my journey and really spending this time with me. I do a lot of shows during the week, and I appreciate everybody who's tuning in and catching my shows. Thank you so much for doing that. I had no idea how many shows I'd be doing or how long I'd continue to do it, like I said before. And, it's just awesome. I appreciate everybody who's listening. It's great to have that support. So we'll get right into this show here. This particular article, After the Abuse Has Ended, from Catherine Patricelli. She posted this in, 2005. So it's an old article, but it doesn't matter. The information is still good. And it's from www.mentalhelp.net. And so I went through this yesterday, but my show was lost. It was dropped. So I kept talking for the half hour, and only a few minutes of it actually got was recorded on the show. So it's unfortunate, but that's all right. We'll just go through this stuff again. This is very important for people to know. She says here, getting out of the abusive situation is the first step toward healing and moving on in your life. But unfortunately, your work doesn't end there. Once you're physically safe and secure, it is a good idea that you seek professional help for any abuse-related difficulties you may develop. For example, you may have difficulty coping with abuse memories themselves. And she says you may also benefit from assistance in coping with problems that develop because you were abused, such as substance abuse problems, sexual or intimacy issues, anger issues, eating disorders, etc. Such problems may occur during your abuse period as a means of coping with the abuse itself, or after the abuse period is over as a means of coping with the abuse memories. And so this is real serious for people who have been abused. Even after you get yourself out of the abusive situation, whether you just grow up and move on from your abusive family, you get away from an abuser in a domestic violence situation. yeah, we all know, all of us survivors know that there's work to do afterwards, and that it does. I don't know. I've never met anybody who's ever walked away unscathed from an abusive situation. Things. It definitely has a huge effect on people, and some people a little bit more than others. And she goes on to talk about that a little bit here. But the thing is once we're safe and secure out of the abusive situation, we really, like they suggest professional help, right? Any kind of abuse-related difficulties you may develop. And I know I didn't go get any professional help, and all of my self-help. And would I go see a counselor or would I go see a therapist? I've talked to counselors and therapists just because of what I do, and especially my shows here. I've actually had therapists and counselors contact me and talk to me a little bit, and I'm not beyond that. You know what I mean? Like years ago, I would have said no way, but now that I realize that there are good people out there, and that there are lots of people out there who do care and really do try to help people out. And so I've read lots of articles, especially on like adult survivors of child abuse, the ASCA.org, and different websites like that who really deal with survivors and survivor issues. I've read lots of information where they've said, if you find a counselor or a therapist and they just don't seem to be working for you, and it's just not clicking, and you're just not comfortable with them, they said just look for another one. We have to ultimately be in charge of our healing journey. If we have to be in charge of our lives, right? We have to know where we want to go in our healing journey, and what the end result would be. And so if you end up with a counselor or therapist, this is the information that they said on those websites. If you get a counselor or therapist who just doesn't seem to click with you, or they don't specialize in what you've been through, just to keep looking for one that does, and that that really wants to work with you and who can work with you, because some counselors and therapists and psychotherapists specialize in different areas, and so they may there may be one out there who has more information or more knowledge about how to help someone who's been through a certain set of abusive situations, right? So it's just important to know that we have rights. We have human rights, and those rights were already really taken away. When you're abused as a child, our rights to life, really, our rights to a good life, were taken away. And so we have to, as adults, as adult survivors, we have to remember that we do have rights, and that we should be in control of our healing journey, and not allow ourselves to be continually hurt as an adult, right? But she said that so many things happen because of the abuse, that we may have coping with certain issues in our life, which could be substance abuse problems, sexual or intimacy issues, anger issues, eating disorders, and stuff like that. And this is a huge problem for people. I know. I was talking about yesterday. I was talking about the fact that I got off the drugs at the age of 21. I did that on my own. It was hard. It took me a couple of years, and I really had to stop hanging around with all the people that I used to hang around with when I was that age, which were all my best friends, because their lifestyle was not going to change, but I needed mine to change, because I needed to get myself straightened up. And it was sad because I had to make a decision, but the abusive lifestyle that they were living was exactly what we all grew up in. And I really wanted to get away from that. I wanted to have a decent life. I didn't want to end up in the gutter or dead from an overdose, or end up just continuing to use drugs and not allow myself to even have a start of a good life, right? So about the age of 21, I actually quit doing drugs, stopped hanging around with the people that I was hanging around with, and it really changed things there. I never really began my healing journey until the age of 41, so another 20 years later. But I did do some work earlier on just to get myself in a better position. But sometimes people need help with that, and they can't get off the drugs. So I know myself, I have a huge problem with smoking, and that's what I was telling everybody yesterday on the show, but it kind of got cut off there. But smoking is a huge issue for me, and I realized that, like smoking cigarettes, right? I've been smoking for a long time, and I did quit for over a year, and I was rather uncomfortable with it, but I was still doing it. And I'm just using it for a crutch, and really I was thinking about it, and that's what I talked about yesterday, was that it all stems back to my childhood, I'm sure of it. And it's incredibly sad that I think that I need these cigarettes, but it's kind of like almost like having a security blanket, They're what I feel like. Oh, if I can have a cigarette, everything's okay, right? As long as I can have a cigarette, right? So it's almost like a safety blanket, like a safety security blanket for a small child, right? I'm still dealing with a lot of stuff, and I think eventually I probably will quit smoking once I work through some more of my stuff. I really think that I won't probably need them anymore. It's not so much even the addiction. I got off of them for over a year, but it's just there's something about it that I'm using in place of something out on. I'm sure it goes back to my childhood. I'm absolutely positive, because it's a way for me to feel safe. As long as I have a cigarette, it's like, oh, I feel good, So I'm just using them for that. It's unfortunate, but lots of people do these things, and it's hard, right? It's very hard to get down to the bottom of what it really is before we can really stop doing what we're doing. But it's important to take a look at that stuff, and people can suffer from all kinds of issues, sexual or intimacy issues. I know I had a lot of problems with that when I was growing up. I'm better now than I ever was, but I had huge problems with that. Anger issues, I had lots of problems with that. Eating disorders. I don't know, I don't have so much of an eating disorder. I'm just kind of don't like to exercise, and so I eat a little bit too much and don't exercise, and so I'm always a little bit overweight. But I don't have too many real eating disorders, which is good. But I have, some issues that I'm still working out, right? And mainly it's just a sense of not being able to relax, And even if I'm sitting around and I have 2 weeks off for holidays, I can't just sit there and just relax and be at peace, because I'm still, it's probably just nervous tension or something. I don't know. But it probably stems from my childhood, I'm sure, because I've felt this way my whole life, so it's not something that's new. I'm working on that, right? There's things that we can do to try to help ourselves, and there's all kinds of great websites out there with coping mechanisms and things that people can try who have been abused, right, to help cope and to help get through some of this stuff. The Child Abuse Survivor Monument, that's a great website for coping with. Michael C. Irving, he's a psychotherapist. He's also a sculptor, and he's a survivor of child abuse himself, Michael C. Irving. And he created this Child Abuse Survivor Monument here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And this monument's awesome. I hope you will go check this website out. If you type into your browser Child Abuse Survivor Monument, it'll bring you to that website. Or if you type in Michael C. Irving, that'll take you there as well. And he's got a great website for people who have survived child abuse. There's all kinds of info on there about adult survivor issues, and then there's whole lists of information about coping lists and things that we can do to try to help ourselves if we're having a hard time and just not doing so well, and maybe having flashbacks or not able to cope through the day, just feeling kind of down or whatever. There's lists, there's things that we can do, and we have to create our own list, what works for us, right? Because what works for me might not work for somebody else. Whether it would be listening to some good, like my favorite music, or dancing, or artwork, painting, taking some time for ourselves if you can, right? I know it's hard because most people are very busy, but trying to find a few minutes, each day to do something that brings a smile to our face, makes us feel good, and whether that be journaling or writing or just anything. People are different, so whatever you like to do, get out and walking. I mean, they say that exercise really does help people to feel better, and I know when I was younger I used to do a lot more of that, you know what I mean? Like I used to belong to gyms and go work out and stuff, and I did feel better. But nowadays I'm just so incredibly inundated and busy, and I still could make time to do an exercise regime, but I just don't because I'm too busy smoking. See, so that's the whole issue, right? It's up to us, right? So we have to actually make the efforts, and it's hard. But so eventually I hope to be able to do something like that, incorporate something like that back into my life. But I have been very, very busy lately. And but there's things we can do, to help ourselves, and we need to be ultimately in charge of that and responsible for that, right? Because no one else can really do that for us, right? And then she says here, it is important to keep in mind that each individual will have a different response to abuse, right? Each person experiences abuse differently and is able to cope with abuse in different ways depending on their circumstances. While one person may suffer greater consequences as a result of abuse than another, there should be no shame involved in how little or how much impact is suffered. And that I was talking about yesterday, but it got lost there on the show. And that's so true, because I've heard people say, well, how come you're doing so well and I'm not doing so well? And, look what you've been through, and I haven't even been through all that, and I'm still having such a hard time. And you can't compare. You just cannot compare abuse to abuse. I found that out over the many, many, many years of surviving this abusive childhood that I lived through. You can't compare abuse to abuse because everyone is different. Everyone suffered something different, even though it may still be the same type of abuse. It would have been different circumstances. There would have been different things involved, and everyone's different. And for me, I've had people ask me, well, what do you think is the worst kind of abuse? What would it be? Physical? Would it be sexual abuse? Would it be psychological, emotional, verbal abuse? And for me, I just think it's all the worst. It doesn't matter. Like, to me, because I've suffered through it all. So, at varying degrees of it all. And so that's the whole issue. I think it's all incredibly damaging. And I think that, somebody who says, well, I was only verbally abused and I wasn't physically abused, and so I shouldn't be feeling this way, right? Or I shouldn't be feeling so bad. And then there would be those that would say, well, I was physically abused, but I was not sexually abused, so I shouldn't be feeling this way. I mean, because I talk to a lot of survivors, and a lot of my friends were survivors, right? And throughout my lifetime, I've had a lot of people who were abused as children, as friends, right? And it's like, there's no way we can sit there and compare ourselves to somebody else, because what we went through was horrific. It doesn't matter, how long it was, the duration. It doesn't matter the severity. To me, it really makes no difference. It's a matter of suffering, and when children are made to suffer like that, at the hands of either their parents or someone in the home, someone in the family, someone gets a hold of the child and causes this distress and this trauma in their life, it's all very damaging, and it all really hurts. So there's no shame in this whole thing, right? Some people would say, well, how come you're doing so well? You seem to be doing so well. I've had people tell me this. They'd be like, well, look at you, you're doing pretty good from what you've been through, and I'll be like, well, yeah, but that's the whole issue, is that we all are at our own we're all on our own healing journey at different points, So like 4.5 years ago, you're talking to somebody who's had 4.5 years to kind of work through this stuff, right? I mean, with 4.5 years ago, I was planning my suicide again, right, and ready to self-injure and not coping well at all. I was able to hold the job down and fake everybody out for sure. I was doing that my whole life, playing the game, but had never really allowed myself to work through this stuff. So 4.5 years ago, I was not anywhere near where I am right now today, right? I was having a hard time coping, right? Whereas, a lot of people know what that's like, especially people who want to self-injure or who do self-injure, and who have suicidal tendencies. Then those of you who if you're listening to this and you've experienced that, then you would know what that's like. And that's where I was 4 years ago. So, 4 years ago, about 4.5 years ago now, is when I decided to actually get proactive on my healing journey and allow myself to heal, because I really thought somebody else was going to be able to do it for me. And so I was sitting on the couch just thinking, why am I never going to be able to get out of this pain? Like, never. Like, why is there no one here that can help me to get out of this pain? You know what I mean? I wasn't really thinking of the fact that I was going to have to do it myself, right? It didn't occur to me that it was going to have to be me to do it until the 4.5 years ago, when I was sitting there and I thought, oh my God, I'm the one that's going to have to do this, and I clued in. And it took me a long time to clue in. I really wish that I would have clued in a long, long time ago. Unfortunately, it just took as much time as it took, right? So yeah, there's no shame in that. We're all in different places in our healing journey, and we all have to go through each piece of it at our own pace and at what's comfortable for us. And everyone's different, and so what works for somebody might not work for you, and what works for me might not work for somebody else, right? As far as what is helping us to heal and what helps us to cope, and so we all have to find out what that is for ourselves, and go with it, right? And so it says there's a lot of luck involved when people who have been abused are able to resiliently recover from abuse with few scars. It doesn't happen often, and much of the circumstances that make it possible to accomplish are not directly in the control of those fortunate few. So, yeah, some people, seem to be pretty resilient and recover from abuse with little problems. And I guess that's true, you know what I mean? But all in all, we all have sort of the same set if you've been abused, you've been abused. And so some people, depending on whether there was any support in the home, if they had a good counselor or a good therapist that really worked with them and they really clicked and they got the help they needed at an earlier age. There's all kinds of reasons why some people may recover from abuse quickly or with few scars. People are just different, right? And I know for myself, even in my 20s, I had a little friend who used to paint. She was a few years younger than me. I kind of looked at her like a little sister. She was a friend of the family, my parents' friend's daughter. And she used to paint and draw, and she was just really into artwork and whatnot. And I remember I was just in my 20s, and I went over to their house. We were over at their house having dinner and stuff. We used to still hang around, right? My whole dysfunctional family, with the members that were left, would still do things together. You know what I mean? Like we were, we would go to these people's homes. The fight would be off. Everybody would behave themselves, and then as soon as we'd leave, the fight would be back on. And that's just how we lived our lives, right? So we'd be over at other people's homes, right? But this girl was painting quite beautiful paintings and drawing pictures, and she asked if she could paint me a picture. I said, yeah, you could. I said, how about just painting me a picture of black? Just paint me a black picture. And that's where my heart was. That's where my mind was in my 20s. I was just black. It was, everything to me was jaded. Everything to me was, ruined because of the abuse that my parents had inflicted on me, and having to watch them do what they did to each other and watch what happened to my brothers in the home. It just, my heart was black. I really couldn't feel, at that point, I really didn't have any real love in my heart for much, right? And it just continued on that way, for many years. And so, what somebody else might be able to walk away from and be perfectly fine, and, somebody else may not be able to. That's why we're all different, so we can't judge each other by our healing journeys by other people, right? So it's very important to not do that. We're all on our healing journey, and we will be at different places at different times. And I think the whole issue is just to remember to hold on and work through the stuff, and know that, that you may experience some bad days, right? Maybe that's always an issue, right? I mean, I say this on my shows because I know that. I go through days where everything's just seems to be working quite well, things are good, and then I'll have a day where I'm just like back down, remembering or, flashbacks and thinking about the whole thing and having kind of a bad day. That can happen, right? So we have to be prepared to work through those bad days, have things set up for our coping mechanisms, right? So set these coping mechanisms into our routines so that we can learn how to cope, right? And that's what I've done, is really work through a lot of this stuff and create some coping mechanisms for myself, so that when I do have these bad days, I don't slip all the way back down to where I was before, because I certainly don't want to go back there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm having a much better time now. So that's why, we just have to find out what works for us and then go for it, right? So she said that people have little control over whether they are abused and little control over how that abuse impacts them. So that's just the truth. When you're a child, you have no control over who's going to abuse you. I mean, my God, like, growing up in that, it's not like you could just say, hi, Mom, hi, Dad, I really wish that you wouldn't abuse me. You know what I mean? It's like, I think I tried that and I got smacked in the mouth, you know what I mean? That's the whole issue, right? I used to tell my parents not to, I wish they wouldn't hurt me, but they didn't care, I mean, it's pretty pathetic what abusive parents will do to their children. And it's even if you try to convince them that what they're doing is wrong, they don't always listen to the children, right? Quite often they don't. My mom would be like, I don't care. If you keep it up, I'm going to kick your ass again, right? That was her attitude, right? And I used to go to school with bruises on my face and stuff and welts and stuff. And I'd tell my mom, I'd point at it and I'd be, look at this on my face. I was like, what am I supposed to tell the teacher? And my mom would be like, just tell her I hit you. I don't care. Tell her I hit you, right? And if you keep it up, I'm going to hit you again. So that was my mom. She was just highly abusive, and she didn't care. They were already brought up on charges, and she was just like, whatever, So yeah, I'd go to school and sit there embarrassed, really quite embarrassed, right, as a young kid in the classroom, trying to hide my bruise, right, or whatever was on my welt on my face, right, which was quite often this case because my mom really liked to hit me in the face, you know what I mean? And so it's pretty sad, that kids have to deal with this, right? And knowing that your mother doesn't even care if the authorities are alerted again, right? She's just going to hurt you anyway, right? That's why, I mean, I developed pretty much an attitude that it didn't matter what I did, my mom was going to hurt me anyway. So that's why I would quite often speak out against my parents, what they were doing to each other. I would speak out against what they were doing to my family. You know, and of course it would get me beaten because I would open my mouth, but I was like, I don't care because you're going to beat me anyway, so what does it really matter? You know, that was my attitude. Like, I'm going to be abused anyway, so why should it matter what I say? So I would just say what I wanted to say and deal with the consequences, right? Because either way, they were going to mistreat me. It was absolutely horrible, and they didn't care if people knew, right? I mean, they would beat us up in the parking lots. They would beat us up on the front yard. My parents didn't care if people saw what they would do to their children, right? They really didn't care if people knew, right? Because people already knew. They were brought up on charges. So it's not like people didn't know. My parents were just very hateful people, ignorant, hateful people, right? So they didn't care if they hurt us, and they didn't care where they did it. So it's pretty sad. Children have no control over that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't help it. And as adults in domestic violence situations, you know, you sometimes don't have control over that either. I mean, the only thing my mom could have done in that situation with my dad would have been to get out, right? You know, she stayed, and she had all these reasons for staying. You know, it's like, no, I can't leave him. You know, every single one of her sons and daughters tried to convince my mother to leave my dad, right? Over the period of years, right? We all told her, you know, you should leave him. Just get away from him, right? I mean, you could have a good life, even if you don't take us. I mean, even the older siblings had said that years before to my mom, you know, like, get out. You know, you don't have to even take us. We'll just deal with Dad, whatever. But you go and you get yourself a good life, right? And she wouldn't do it. And then we, you know, later on, even when I got older and I was an older teen, I used to try to convince her to leave my dad, you know, and she wouldn't do it. And it's pretty sad because she had the choice. It's not like he had her tied up to a chair, you know, for 365 days a year for 40 odd years. I mean, she could have gone, she could have left, but he had her tied up in her mind. That's where he had her tied up. And my mom was already abused as a child, so she kind of thought that her life was just going to be that way. She accepted it. She just accepted that, and then on her deathbed was miserable, you know. She was just like, what a miserable life, you know. And it was a horrible life for her. Even though she was my main abuser, I did try to protect her. I really did everything I could to protect her, you know, including taking a bat to my dad's head, and including, you know, getting in between their fights and trying to push my dad out of the way. You know what I mean? You know, that's the whole issue. I mean, I was willing to step in and get hurt myself to try to protect my mother who was abusing me. I mean, so if that tells you really how bad my dad was, that's exactly the issue, right? And so, you know, my dad was mentally ill, schizophrenic and everything else. So, you know, he half the time was out of his head and didn't have a clue what he was doing, right? But the sad thing is that my mom paid the price for that, and so did we, right? And that's why, you know, had my mom I really wanted my mom to get out because I thought she'd be happier. And if my mom was happier, then I'd be happier because my mom was my main abuser. So I thought, well, if mom's happy, then she won't abuse me anymore. So I was always kind of trying to promote that she should have a good life, right? And I was always trying to be on her side, right, so that to try to avoid the abuse, right? And it didn't help. It actually didn't matter in the end. And you know, she continued to abuse me until I was 17 years old physically, and then her toxic, abusive, psychological damage was still done up until the day she died, right? So, or a year before she died, actually. So, pretty sad. People don't necessarily change. We have little control over what happens to us as children, but we do have control over what happens to us as adults at some point, right? So if your life is in danger and you feel that your life is in danger or your children's life is in danger, make sure that you get help from the professionals. Find out from the domestic violence organizations how to help yourself and how to keep yourself alive, right? It's very important. Contact the NCADV, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Contact domesticviolence.org, but contact somebody, even in your local area. You know, get a domestic violence counselor. If your life is being threatened and you're concerned for your safety and your children's safety, make sure that you get some help, right? Because as adults, we do have we have to do that, right? We have to be the ones in charge of trying to save our lives. As children, there's not much you can do. You're just abused. You're abused. I mean, what are you going to do? Slight of running away and ending up on the streets, right? It's pretty sad. The choices are pretty small and pretty limited for children, but for adults, you have to try to save your life. It's very, very important. So we have a couple of seconds left here. Thanks everybody for being here. I had some guests here in the chat room here today. Thanks very much for tuning in. And if you need any information that I might have, just get a hold of me here on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook and whatnot. I'll be around. And take good care of yourselves. I'll be back on tonight on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio and 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then I'll be back on my show tomorrow morning, same time, same place. So take care, everybody. Have a really good day. Make sure you hang in there. Don't ever give up. That's my big message here, do not ever give up, right? Just continue to fight for what is yours, and that is, a good life, right? We do, excuse me, we are responsible for that, and we do have to, be proactive in our healing journey, right, and realize that we do have the right to a good life, but ultimately it is going to be up to us to have that, right? So take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.